Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryant, and my guest today is Rohan Singh, who is the Associate Vice President of Client Services at Marlabs. You'll hear about what he does over there at Marlabs, but a lot of what we're going to talk about is related to that, related to digital transformation and helping enterprises understand digital transformation, how they should utilize it tied to business practices and specific problems and needs, and then how to execute that digital transformation. And we go into kind of all of the elements of what that might include. We talk about what teams you should involve and how to get them together and understand the end goal, how to explain these sorts of things to the C-suite and what kind of questions they may have back and forth with the various teams involved. Rohan himself has a background in networking, so he's mostly focused on the infrastructure side, which is, of course, how he made it onto Telegeography Explains the Internet. But we have a really great conversation looking at what it means to go through this process, solve these problems, select vendors, and really understand how going through that process of digital transformation can potentially improve your business and solve specific problems that you're having now. Then at the end, we get into some of the future of networking, and Rohan is particularly interested in making sure that young people who are in the computer science or software development world are aware of networking and maybe can join on to some of the really cool stuff that is emerging out of the networking field. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Rohan. Okay, welcome to the podcast, Rohan.
Pleasure. Nice to be on.
Yeah, excellent. So, why don't you give us a brief background on yourself, and then what you do at Marlabs? I'm sure that a lot of listeners probably aren't familiar with Marlabs, so probably a little background there as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with Marlabs. So we're a digital transformation company, which should make everyone know immediately what we do. We focus a lot on customizing solutions for our clients, whether that be through things such as Salesforce and CRMs, being able to take records and important business processes and be able to develop the right solution for each and every company. I focus mostly on the infrastructure side of the house, going from an evaluative standpoint all the way through to implementation and finding the right technologies, the right strategies, and advising people and our clients on how to actually realize this project as possible and realize what they're trying to do is feasible, because a lot of these projects, such as cloud transformation, sound daunting and very ambiguous. We try and
Right.
tie it down to something specific and put a plan around it and go execute.
Excellent. And a little background on yourself as well. How did you end up at Marlabs?
Yeah, so I joke with everyone. Everyone that knows me well is going to groan at this, but I saw my first network diagram when I was 12 years old. So I feel like I've been doing networking my entire life.
I
My
mean,
dad,
that's really cool. That's yeah. So, yeah.
yeah, my dad drew it on a piece of paper, and I said, I'm never doing this. And then somehow, one way or another, I ended up at Cisco as my first job out of college. Went through the sales training program on the engineering side and fell in love with everything. It seemed so logical, it seemed so simple. And then you really dive into the technologies and see how complicated and fascinating it is. Went to a startup from there, ran communications, security, and technology here in Austin for hypergrowth startup, and went into the consulting space, following my dad's footsteps, and eventually met Marlabs in that field. And it made sense to get together and actually go full bore and join them and be able to bring my skill set and their resources together to be able to take advantage of both sides of the house.
Right, absolutely. Well, I don't talk to too many second generation network engineers, so I actually think that's really cool. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think it used to be an olden thing where you'd kind of do what your parents used to do and follow in their
hmm
footsteps. So maybe it'll be a new trend that we start back up.
Yeah, see, my dad was an architect, and he always told me you can be anything you want to be except for an architect or a lawyer. Yeah. All right. So, you mentioned that what you do is you help clients move through a digital transformation. actually really want to start out at the ground floor here. It is telegeography explains the internet. And you also, on that note, mentioned that your particular focus is the infrastructure side, which is why you're on this show and not some other potential ones, right? But could you just define for us digital transformation, how you guys see it, how you approach it? Because it is a very capacious kind of term, in terms of what people exactly mean when they throw it around. If someone comes to you looking to do a digital transformation, especially in light of the sort of infrastructure changes, how would you explain that maybe to someone on their team that wasn't quite sure?
Yeah, I think it's different for every single company, and it's different. I don't want to give a consulting answer, but it's
Of
going to have
course,
to be.
it
It's
always depends. Yeah,
Yeah, it always
yeah.
depends. I think the best way to look at it is uh, what we find is either we approach a client or a client approaches us knowing that there's a problem, or we see a problem evolving in an existing
Mm-hmm.
client. And the solution to that is something different from what's been happening before. So to give examples, we look at data center or call center transformations, and we
Hmm.
throw the word digital around it because there's a lot of digital assets that come into play. So tying whether it's a Salesforce CRM to be able to go to a screen pop for an agent or be able to take advantage of a hybrid cloud infrastructure. And the big thing is always realizing what is the end goal in mind and what are we
Hmm.
trying to solve. So that transformation really is it's kind of what we do as kids is with a puzzle, right? We saw the pieces, we think we can put it together the right way and figuring out what goes well together and what doesn't. And
Hmm.
that's how we guide people through this process. It's not always the same, and it does depend, but the technologies and the strategies deployed overarchingly are the same, right? It's cost savings,
Hmm.
optimization of spend, optimization of resources. How do we get all that together and pair it to the right technology so that it is actually a meaningful change and not just we're doing cloud because everybody else is doing
Right.
cloud. There has to be something exactly tied to it as a business outcome.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. So you're justifying it from a particular business outcome or business process, rather than sort of getting a technology for technology's sake, matching technology to desired outcome.
Yeah, it's really rare that something like a cloud transformation is a direct solution to anything. It's more or less there's something of a feature or something that you're
Mm,
gaining as a function out of that transformation that's really driving the business forward or the technology that you're providing forward for somebody else.
right.
What we always try and avoid advising clients, and we advise them against making a transformation for transformation's sake. There has to be
Mhm.
something specific to get out of it. And we do get caught up, especially in the networking world, with a lot of buzzwords. There's
Mm.
SASE, there's optimization, there's transformation. So actually digging through and finding what that is for every company is half the battle.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And while the products can differ, of course, there's another sort of capacious term that almost always comes into play, right? Which is cloud. Ultimately this is about moving resources necessarily off of maybe corporate premises and into some shared infrastructure or something like that. Would that almost always be true, right?
Yeah, and I think there's if we go back a few years, there was a huge run. Everything's going cloud. Amazon's awesome. Let's get as
Mhm.
many things in there as possible. And then somebody saw the bill and was like, oh wow,
Right.
this is
Yeah.
expensive. So it's been interesting to see that everyone went diving headfirst into cloud and said, let's go put everything there. And then cost and other things started bearing into that decision and said, all right,
Latency
maybe
probably in some cases.
yeah, latency, and it depends on the application that you're deploying and where you're also trying to put these technologies, right? You have to now go across partitions in Amazon to make sure that it's redundant to the nth degree and whatever degree you're comfortable with, and
Mhm.
securing things and less control when you put something into the cloud as when you have on premise. I think people started saying, all right, we might have shifted too hard one direction.
Mhm.
Let's find a good in between. And I think that's what we're at. I think a more realistic level of everyone's in some hybrid cloud approach. Yeah,
Right.
there's smaller companies or particular companies in healthcare that can consume a lot of cloud services or platforms in the cloud, and they can get 99% of the way there. But I think large enterprises are finding that one foot on premise and one foot in the cloud is the happy Goldilocks there.
Hmm. So that might be something you would help them sort out, is what should we lift and shift, and what should we keep control of on prem and stuff like that.
Exactly, and it's an important decision, right? It's so nice to have cloud and be able to expand and deploy something and spin something up with a couple clicks, and you have something that would take months to deploy on premise done in the matter of minutes. But it's also the realization of how much control do you lose, how much visibility do you lose, and then how do you go about fighting that battle back to find that visibility? Do we need more tools? Do we need to bring developers? It's a whole different arena, and yeah, like you said, advising clients on that realization of let's not just do it for the sake of doing it, and let's make it effective where possible. So there are some things that businesses do desperately need, and they want the speed of the cloud to spin something up, and it makes a lot of sense. So yeah,
Hmm.
realizing that is really really important.
But every solution creates an additional problem, right?
Yeah, that's why consultants will never go out of business, right? Yeah.
Exactly. All right, so we I think understand clearly what we're talking about. Could you, again, knowing that this will depend a lot, but take us through kind of what are the key elements of a successful digital transformation?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is always realizing what the problem is or that there is a problem, right?
Hmm.
I think as consultants, that's the hardest thing to get
Right.
across is to define what is the problem statement and what are we trying to solve.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, we joke about the worst tickets in IT are my internet speed is slow or my internet is bad, right? What does that
Right.
even mean? There's 7,000 things, and that relates to a lot of IT strategies. So to talk about something that's really successful and how do we define that is starting with a very clear defined problem statement and what we're trying to solve, and then everything really lines up on its own. So to give an example of things that we've been working on recently, a lot of cloud contact center transformations. So the ability for our clients to understand what they're going to undertake with the cloud transformation is just as important as picking the platform and picking the solution.
Mm-hmm.
So the engagement we did recently is to do a case study, global case study on is it one feasible to do cloud or is it better to do on premise where each and every single global region and each business unit seem to have such specific wants and needs that
Mm.
doing something cloud might not make sense because it's like replicating the same contact center over 15, 16 different times, but having something highly customizable and specific.
Right.
Cloud becomes a little bit easier if it's flipped around, right? If we can do cookie cutter 80, 90% of the way there and customize small pieces, it becomes way more effective to deploy it. So we understood what the problem was. We analyzed what is that challenge, right? So we have the
Right.
problem and there's a hurdle to get over. The hurdle
Mhm.
was is this really feasible? Does it make more sense to go cloud or is it better to be on premise and do highly customizable stuff? And we found that when you actually have these conversations, a lot of those hurdles are just barriers put up by a lack of cross communication or lack of real understanding what do business units want, especially when it's globally geo dispersed. It's the telephone game, right? If it goes up the food chain high enough, eventually the message flips around so many times that you're not exactly sure if that's where we started with. So breaking down those communication boundaries and breaking down those hurdles and barriers, and then putting an actual plan forward, right? It's 80% of the way there to identify the problem and identify the challenges, but now we have to navigate around that world.
Right.
And that's, I think, where we differentiate ourselves from a lot of other consulting organizations is we don't just say go to this platform, we don't say just put this technology in place. We actually say, okay, we've gotten there, we've selected these things, let's actually put a plan around how do we deploy it, what
Hmm.
needs to be in place. Do you need our help? Do you need other consulting help? We don't do everything under the sun. We realize
Sure.
what our strengths and weaknesses are. How do we actually make this into a program so that when our clients obviously have to go present this back internally, we arm them with that knowledge that it's not just we picked X platform, it's going to take us this long and this much money. There's actually a phased approach and a plan on how to implement that across that corporation.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really great point, because certainly if you are coming just from, say, the IT infrastructure team, or more generally the IT team at, say, a large multinational, and you know that there are certain tools out there that may help you solve a problem, of course, if you go directly to those vendors, they're just going to try to sell you a product. But I think having a holistic vision, no doubt, of not just what products should I be using, but how does that actually solve my problem, and who needs to be involved, and how does that affect maybe other products that I have. I think that having that ability to sort of pull back, I think, is really key. And I talk to a lot of IT infrastructure teams and whatnot, and I'll talk to companies that have roughly the same size in terms of number of sites, and revenue and all that kind of thing. And one of them will have 400 engineers on their staff, and one of them will have like 25. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there it runs the gamut of like how companies have invested in that particular part of their business. Obviously, it depends on your industry and whatnot, but that I can definitely see. I mean, obviously I'm an analyst, and we do consulting, so it's I come from that side of the world, but I can definitely see how orchestrating all of this, not in the IT sense necessarily, but in the general business sense, is really crucial for making it successful.
Yeah, and I think the important thing there is making sure that it's no long. I think I would say maybe if you go 20 years back or so, an ecosystem or a real step back view of how to implement these technologies wasn't so important.
Hmm.
One, there were less vendors in the marketplace, so it was a little bit easier just to be like, all right, for network, I'm going to do Cisco. They're
Right.
800-pound gorilla in the
Getting
room.
MPLS, it's just MPLS,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah, exactly. There weren't a lot of options. There weren't there, and we're almost spoiled for choice now. But what becomes more important is because we have so many choices, having
mhm,
one single vendor is very rare that provides all the services, and there's very few of them that still do it. Right? Cisco is probably one of the
right.
smaller, one of the few that still make that list to do 99% of things that's in the infrastructure space.
Hmm.
But now we need to look at, okay, CRM is tied into call center is tied into network's tied into security, and it's very hard to have a conversation with any client that says, I need to do X project with X technology and not look at everything across the board and see how it fits in.
Hmm.
So it becomes really, really important to fine tune that way of I guess doing those consulting engagements, to stop looking at, you have a call center platform issue, you have a data center platform issue, let's solve that. It's very rare that that's always the only thing. Or if it's a transformation, you have to incorporate that to everything else around it that it's going to touch to. So it's
Hmm.
a I think the we're finally seeing that the corporations are that we're and our clients are getting to that phase two and getting to that point where they understand that we need to break down these barriers and stop looking at everything as a single problem, a network problem or a security problem. It's
For
really an
sure.
ecosystem.
Now, I'll be curious to the extent to which you can really sort of dig into the answer to this question, and not to come at you from left field or anything. But if an enterprise was approaching like sort of a more like a carrier kind of MSP, right? So that has specific channel partners. Even just a pure play MSP might have specific channel partners. Are you able to sort of put together the partner ecosystem without channel partners are in place, or do you have sort of vendors that are your go-to for this particular thing, or how do you work that out with a client?
Yeah, I think there are definitely market leaders in
Hmm.
those that you always bring to the table, or you see a particular problem that those market leaders are known to be very good at solving, right?
Sure.
So give an example that on the carrier side for something like broadband circuits and DIA, there are preferences that we have, right? Granite
Hmm.
Telecommunications is one of the companies we partner with on a lot of these because they do provide great pricing and speed and efficiency of deployment, but it's very rare that we have a conversation with a client, say, this is the only partner we're going to
Right.
evaluate with, and this is the only
Mhm.
one. It's the same thing with contact center platforms. We really like Genesis as a solution. We really like what Amazon is doing and eventually going to be able to grow towards. So we do bring them to the table as things to immediately start considering and start that conversation. But we
Mhm.
like to say as vendor and partner agnostic as possible when we
Gotcha.
do something that's a engagement from what do I do and how do I implement it. We'll bring the partners we prefer and we've done work with and that do good work, but we'll also
Mhm.
bring the rest of the market that might fit. Um, Actually going through some of those proposals right now in like the SD-WAN space and the network space. You know who's at the top of Gartner's Magic Quadrant every year. You
Sure.
know who's the top of your mind in the last few deployments you've done and where the market is shifting towards and who they're using. But it's very important to be able to say every company is different, right? It's
Right.
every company will have something that might fit better. The GUI interface looks better for the engineers. This relationship is better in these particular regions for providing the carrier space. So it's really important to have a good list of vendors that you can bring to the table if there is a moment's notice that you can have that good relationship with. But if
Mhm.
it's long term and strategic partnerships, always try and take a step back and be as neutral as possible.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was getting at. It is, looking at it from the perspective of, again, talking to a lot of IT infrastructure managers and whatnot. Some of them might go to a carrier or an MSP or whatever because of the specific channel partners they have.
Yeah.
And certainly, again, the geographic scope, the industry that you're in, has a big impact on that. If you have a global network, it's a lot easier to go with. You were saying, mentioning SD-WAN, it's a lot easier to go with Viptela versus Silver Peak, that kind of, or HP, that kind of thing. But if you have a very different network, maybe U.S. domestic only or something like that, there's a lot of alternatives that you would be missing out on if you
Yep.
just went back to that sort of like locked in channel partner kind of relationship.
Yeah, and it's always good to have that competition too. It's
Hmm.
good to if I think from a consulting standpoint to bring multiple vendors to the table because whether it's pricing or whether it's just the pressure of knowing somebody else is in the room and it's not a cakewalk, it
That's
helps
right.
drive that. And I mean,
Yeah.
we have it in our space all the time. It's
Hmm.
very rare that it's just one consulting that's brought in to take a look at a problem and analyze it. It's almost
Hmm.
always hey, we're going to go through the gamut. We're going to ask a lot of questions, and we like to operate in that space because we think we're different and we provide
Right.
a different value than walking in and telling you the time from your own watch, right? We all
Hmm.
joke about how some of the larger companies do that, and that's why we like to be a little bit small and nimble and help grow the relationship that way, where everything doesn't fit for us, everything doesn't fit for you, but let's
Hmm.
find the right solution. And that works in pretty much anything that you're going to do in the IT spaces. Yeah, there's preferred people, yeah, there's market leaders and industry leaders, but let's bring everyone that makes sense to the table.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you from my perspective. So we benchmark networks like what WANs for large multinationals, and the minute they need, all we do is provide the data. The minute they need like help with a negotiation or technology strategy or something, we're always happy to bring in another firm that focuses on that kind of thing. And we've learned which ones we think were successful and whatnot. So I think it's helpful to have a broad reach of different services and vendors and everything that you can really help your clients out with.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I want to ask you, Rohan, do you deal a lot more sort of directly with, say, the IT infrastructure team or the cloud team, that sort of thing? And if so, do you have to help them then get to the CIO level, or do you deal with the CIOs directly yourself?
Yeah, answer is yes.
Yeah. All right.
So
Yeah. So
it,
so then the follow on to that is that I want to get into the sort of struggles because I end up mostly talking to the folks that are, say, unfortunately this title is very rarely out there, but the WAN manager, right, the IT infrastructure head. Um, do you see troubles that I see in terms of them communicating with the CIO? Sometimes CIOs are very focused on network. Sometimes they don't know very much about the network at all. Is that a struggle to sort of describe the network piece, the infrastructure piece, not just network, but sort of
Yeah.
cloud and whatnot, to certain CIOs who maybe have heard about new technologies or don't, they're managing huge teams with a whole bunch of different responsibilities. How do you work on sort of translating all of this into CIO speak, if you will?
Yeah, I think there's really two perspectives if you look at it from the CIO or the management director line. The first part is the game of telephone of trying to communicate is always difficult
Mm-hmm.
for somebody inside a company, depending on how many steps removed they are. You create a presentation or a proposal, it's got to go up a few steps, and it always gets translated over and over, and everyone puts their own spin on it. And by the time it gets up there, it might be something different than what you had entailed. And then the other side is looking from the CIO level down, having the expectation that your team can run the infrastructure, manage it,
Hmm.
take care of day-to-day problems or any changes that are going on internally while still looking at the marketplace and trying to understand what's new, what's feasible, what strategies are. It becomes difficult. And I think uh, putting both those sides together, that's where we do a good job of being able to translate both directions, right? From the
Hmm.
CIO's messaging, hey, the market is going this way. Why aren't we talking about this? And being able to talk to the frontline managers and engineers and say, does this even fit? Does it make sense? And let us have that conversation with the CIO and say, yeah, the market's going this way, and we've done these implementations, but this does or this doesn't make sense for you and
Hmm.
your company. And then the other way around, we have a lot of tie-ins with the senior director and vice president level, and it's the same thing as the messaging doesn't come across the same way when it's internal. Sometimes, I won't say in all cases, but sometimes it might sound as an excuse. Well, we can't do this because we don't have that access, or right, we don't
Right.
have information to this. And oftentimes it's better to have that outside consultant come in and be able to advocate for the group to say, yeah, at the rest of the companies at your level and your competitors, everyone has access to this data or this
Mm-hmm.
information or this technology. We need to provide it to your team so that they can make whatever change you're asking for, whatever strategy needs to be deployed. So it's really important to find that balance of translating the thoughts between both of those leaders, right? That's whether it's the direct managers or the CIOs, to be able to set realistic expectations and outcomes. And that's where, as I always say, the problem statement is almost the most important part of it. Is it truly a problem? Is there something else that's causing it? And being able to have those skip level conversations or strategic conversations with everyone at the table, having a fair voice is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I had on a guest who wrote a book about SASE, and literally in the book, he had different definitions and ways of talking about SASE depending on whether you were talking to the security team, the IT infrastructure team, or the C level kind of folks, right? Because
Yeah.
in not in a snarky kind of way, but in the way that they all have different concerns and different understandings of what's going on, and it's important to be able to translate across all those groups. So.
Yeah, and the CIOs often are tied to something that's so drastically different than what the directors and managers have to be gold at. And
Mhm.
strategically, CIOs sometimes are gold on how much cost savings can you bring this year, right?
Right.
Or how efficient can this platform that we have be, and make sure that it stands up for as many hours and minutes in the entire year. And that might be different when you go down or up the ladder. So
Hmm.
that's also important to acknowledge, is that teams are gold so differently, and we're
Right.
incentivized to do different things. So tying that together and making sure everyone's on the same page is just that's very important.
Yeah. Well, and to what you alluded to before too, that the complexity of all of this is so different than it used to be. If you
Yeah.
think back a few years ago when maybe SD-WAN was pretty new, there was this slam dunk CIO argument, right? Which is like, oh, if we ditch MPLS and we can cut our network costs in half, and you know, that is true, right? But then there's like a whole bunch of other things to consider. Like all of a sudden, I have local breakouts. I need a whole new security strategy, and the security team, wasn't even prepared for that necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And oh, I've moved all these workloads into the cloud, and now we have not only new cloud bills, but we have to move workloads between clouds that we didn't have to worry about when we were on
Yep.
an MPLS network, and so I think the complexity of all of this really lends itself to having someone who can pull back from all of that and be able to give you a bigger picture, you know?
Yeah, there's never one solution to any problem, whatever it is in networking or life. It's very rare, and that's very important. Is if you switch off from MPLS to DIA circuits and broadband and SD-WAN, okay, there's new costs and new challenges and something completely different. So yeah, it's important for. I think that goes to the higher leadership levels too. Is, oh, the market's doing this, where we can deploy this technology tomorrow. Let's go do it. Okay, is your team ready? Is your infrastructure ready? Is the support ready so that you can go make those changes? Let's not just jump in
Mhm.
and try and take advantage of cost savings where in the long run it might get more and more expensive.
Yeah, and I think that that leads me into this, which we've touched on a bit, but I wonder if you could focus on a little more of just getting harmonization across all of these different sort of stakeholders within it. Again, the C-suite has certain ideas, the security team, the cloud team, also even just like the idea of like developers, like within the organization, if we're changing our infrastructure, that might impact what DevOps does, even if they traditionally had nothing to do with networking, right? So
Yeah, yeah. I think I'll break that into two parts. So first is just breaking down those barriers for those conversations is so important. Going back to one of the things that we that we just worked through in a case study for the global contact center. It's the assumption going in is that this is not possible because we think everyone is different, but no one actually had. It's difficult to go through team by team, region by region and have the same conversation over and over again and then capture all that and bring it together. And I think that's the importance of in I think in IT as a whole is one bringing the business and IT operations closer together.
Mhm.
But in order, I think, to even have that effective conversation, bringing the IT teams closer together also becomes important. So you talked about SASE just before. I don't think anyone really still knows what SASE is, right? We can't put we can explain the acronym and we can
Right.
show diagrams and vendors can all say that this is part of a SASE solution and claim they're SASE ready. But the thing is, it's really, I think, at the heart of it is we can't have a network and a security strategy and a voice strategy and a mobile device management strategy and have these all be siloed. It's
Right.
it's more and more about
Exactly.
let's break this all apart so that when there's a security change, the network team knows about it and is aware of how that affects them and vice versa and so on and so forth. And once you have your IT teams more closer together and unified and what's a strategy going across and how all of these things affect one another, then you can tie the business side together with the ability for IT teams to have that direct conversation. So I think it
Mhm.
becomes really, really important to have that conversation together, but you have to be prepared for it. You can't just jump in tomorrow and say, all right, my network engineers and security engineers are all tied together. We're going to go have an important business conversation with how that
Right.
affects you. And then on the development and the DevOps side, you know, I I always thought that we're always going to stick with waterfall methodologies and the traditional project timelines in networking because it never seemed like there was a logical connection. But more and more, I'm seeing a lot of DevOps bleeding into the infrastructure side
Mhm.
and having direct connections with what the development teams are doing if you have them, so much so to the point that networking and developers are going to have to get closer and closer together. Whether you're
Right.
creating custom applications or using APIs, those conversations are becoming one and the same. You can't really
Mhm.
separate them apart. So yeah, I think it's an important conversation for every corporation to start thinking is if we have a development practice, how do we tie that into the infrastructure and security stack as well, rather
Right.
than looking at it as programming and networking?
Right, right. Well, then there's a whole other issue too of like kind of network as code, right? So emerging as well. So on that, I want to sort of close this out here with your take on just the future of networking because I love talking to folks like you that have a perspective from a lot of different companies, different industries that you see different things going on. What are you seeing sort of from that perspective that is maybe lacking in the market now? Like what skills do we need to focus on? Where are companies maybe deficient in being able to find the talent that they need?
Yeah, I think one is people joining the market out of college is I think a big gap, and I think the other thing is because of that, the other gap that's created is adopting new technology. So I'll go into both. I think without the pipeline of, if we look at how network engineers join a company like Cisco, I'll give the example of my direct experience. Every single one of the engineers in my cohort, we all touched and dabbled a little bit with networking, but none of us were network engineering degrees, right? We're computer scientists, we're
Mm-hmm.
computer engineering. We kind of fiddled with it in one way, shape, or form in classes, but there's never a focus on just network engineering. So I wonder if there's definitely something on the college level that we could start focusing on and create more of a demand there, because I see
Hmm.
either people going straight in out of high school into kind of a trade place where they could start
Right.
local IT shops and things like that. And I think there's great development you can get out there, out of that. But there's nothing in higher education that I've seen that really points towards a future in network engineering. And
Hmm.
the push and the demand is there, right? There's so
Right.
many software engineers that are out there, and we're catching up on pay structures and the demand that's needed. There's thousands of jobs in network engineering that go unfilled every year. So
Yeah.
having those two kind of tied together more in the school level, I think would be really important, and move away from, I took machine assembly programming in college, which I think there's like six jobs in the entire world for,
Right.
probably still. So, seeing some of those courses shift out and move towards that to create the pipeline of new network engineers and new security engineers. And I think the other side of it then goes into, because there's been a limited supply, what we've really seen is, when I go to a lot of clients, I see a lot of senior people that have been doing this for 30, 40 years, and
Hmm.
they're really sharp, really, really dedicated to their craft of network security engineering. But I've also had that same conversation where, a particular solution like Meraki with a GUI that doesn't have CLI,
Mm.
like I won't use it. I need CLI, and
Right.
it's the conversation, and it's a generational shift where people in my generation are so much more used to GUI interfaces and
Right.
moving away from that. And I think things like Chat GPT that's come out, I don't know how much of that's going to be automated, or you could just type in and say, plug in this port and turn on a VLAN. So I think the adoption of these newer technologies has been a little bit more delayed because of, I won't say that people are scared, but they're just not used to it. If you
Hmm.
do something for 30 years, why
Right.
would you want to move on to something new that you have to go relearn, and you have to learn
Hmm.
programming now? So I think tying both those things together is, current engineers need to become more comfortable with newer technologies. We also need to build a new pipeline of fresh engineers out of college to fill the needs of the market.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems to me there's a kind of natural convergence in that sense that, if you're talking about the sort of the old school of engineering, it was like sort of an electrical engineering kind of degree. It's like a physical thing. There's like
Yeah.
this physical realm that you're working with your hands in a way, whereas, like I said, networking is now becoming much more software oriented or whatever. And certainly it seems like you're saying we train lots of software engineers, but they don't necessarily understand how networks work. And
Yeah.
what's the solution there? Should people like you become professors, I guess? So,
I,
yeah.
maybe one of these days.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, but I really do think it goes down to, at whether it's a university, high school level, whichever way it is. I don't think there's enough of a focus on something of a technology as specific as networking. And
Hmm.
even with the emergence of coding and all that into the networking space, I still don't see a lot of software engineers that even take classes to understand it,
Right.
right? When I
Right.
was programming, all that I needed to do was be able to remember what port 80 was and make sure that it was able to connect to my computer, so that I could run some scripts against whatever API calls that I have. And I think it's both things. Creating that field and that degree on its own is important, but
Hmm.
also being well-rounded individuals. I think when we leave leave college, we leave that behind a little bit. We become so hyper focused on being the best at whatever our job is, and being trained in that. Getting exposure to other things is important. So
Hmm.
being able to lift your head on whatever your project is, whatever your day-to-day job is, trying to learn whatever auxiliary things are around you in the technology space becomes important. We get we fortunately or unfortunately have to be that way as consultants. We have to keep ourselves aware of the marketplace and what's going on. But
Right.
when you join a corporation and you're expected to do a particular task and keep something running or code something in particular, it's
Got
easy
a
to
laser
lose
beam.
sight. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's easy to lose sight of whatever else is in continuous education. So yeah, I don't think,
Yeah.
as I said, I don't think there's one solution. I think there's
Mhm.
many different ways of tackling it.
Well, I can tell you as the dad of some middle schoolers, it's we need a YouTube influencer, I guess, in the networking space. My kids just had like their little honor roll assembly the other day, and they asked all the kids who made honor roll in middle school, what do you want to be when you grow up? There's lots of pro athletes,
Yeah.
right? And but there was a large amount of programmers, like say folks like, oh, I want to learn, I want to do coding, I want
Yep.
so I think just bringing into, and where do they get that? Obviously, well, I live in Northern Virginia, so there's a lot
Yeah.
of parents in that, right? But certainly there's a lot out there for kids. If you go to Khan Academy or anything, they have a whole little coding course, like just letting them know, they of course when they say software development, they're thinking they want to design games, right? but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know but there's the network is really cool, obviously.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing here, right? So maybe even some just like influencers on, like, hey, frankly, we're trying to do a little bit of that, like our submarine cable maps, like get people excited to understand that there is a physical infrastructure spanning the globe here, and that's what makes all of this work, right? So we just need to get more of that out there, maybe. So start a YouTube channel, Rohan.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'll start with people understanding what the cloud is, and then
Yeah,
go point at a
absolutely.
cloud
Yeah,
in the sky.
I have a coffee cup that says, "There is no cloud, only other people's computers." So
Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
um,
exactly.
uh, which I say a lot, but that's a great case in point of like just dispelling, not myths per se, but just complete missing understanding. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, no, I joke about it with one of my really close friends. My wife's an electrical engineer, and I take for granted every time I plug something into the wall. I have no idea what's going on. It's
that's
magic to me, right? I know
exactly.
there's two or three prongs, and I know there's a current. What happens? But I think more and more of that is whether it's the younger generation in YouTube or it's just being curious about these things. I think so
Hmm.
many people take the internet for granted, and
Right.
I think I did too until I joined Cisco. And I was like, wow, just to go to Google and get a search result is there's
It's a
so many
miracle.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so many steps in the middle. I
Yeah.
encourage everyone who's never done it, do a trace route to Google and
Hmm.
you see how
Yeah.
many steps there are, and pull up those public IP addresses to understand how far a signal goes back and forth just to
Hmm.
pull simple information. And we take that for granted, like I do with electricity. And I understand that maybe I
Right.
need to find some electrical engineering influencers to deal with more. But I think curiosity is just as important in this field, and just uncovering what those things actually mean.
Yeah, and what to me ends up being so fascinating about it, that's a good sort of hook to get people interested, is that it's an emergent order.
Yeah.
In a way, there's a disanalogy there with the electrical system, because that's very vertically integrated, and there's a
Yeah.
quasi government. The internet happens because of the actions of thousands of completely unrelated companies that are all just trying. It's like it's a really fascinating study in human activity, truly. So I think we can get the message out there, work on
Yeah.
that. So, yeah.
And we've somehow all agreed to network standards and gotten
Yeah.
together and agreed to how these things are going to work. It really is surprising. And maybe by the time the next generation gets in, IPv6 will be relevant too. Although,
That's right. Fine. But I've been hearing IPv6 evangelists for the last like 10 years. So yeah,
yeah, I don't think it would be a networking podcast without one IPv6 joke or
absolutely.
reference.
Excellent. All right. Well, Rohan, this has been great fun. We'll much appreciate your insights. If folks want to find you, keep up with what you're doing, what's the best way maybe to do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn because I've disavowed a lot of social media, but maybe I need to
Yeah,
start
I'm
with
not on Twitter. I always have to
Twitter.
give that caveat, which was long before the whole recent news about it. I just could never get into it. I don't know.
Yeah,
I understand it's useful, but
yeah. LinkedIn is the best way, and maybe on another podcast or two with you would
yeah,
be great. This has
absolutely.
been great.
Yeah, we should do it again for sure. All right, cheers. All right, thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.